ANC created load shedding. The ANC created the electricity supply problem in this country, and they're pretending they're fixing it now. The only reason that there hasn't been load shedding for the last 2 months prior to the election, unsurprisingly, is because the economy is not growing, so there's no demand on the electricity grid by the economy. Why invest in an environment where you have a moronic, destructive, incompetent, kleptocratic organization like the ANC?
But you're still invested in the country.
I live here. I have money here that I can't take out. And I'm based here and I'm not leaving. So I'm going to try and make the best of it, but I'm going to protect myself by having the majority of my assets overseas.
Wow, for me this is really interesting. Rob Hersov here, in a really scathing critique, is blasting the ANC to the moon, actually calling the ANC a kleptocracy. That's really new for me. Let's listen to how he really describes the ANC and the failing state of South Africa under the ANC regime, and I'll be back for some really interesting analysis on where South Africa stands on the global kleptocracy scale.
Rob, I want to start here with a quote you said. You said the ANC is sick and dying, but the brand is still strong. We're 24 hours out from this election. What is the ANC brand right now?
So the ANC brand, they're still trying to play the game of the liberation movement that saved the country in 1994 from apartheid, that brought the Rainbow Nation together. And to be fair, they did a very good job for the first 10, 15 years of their rule, but they've been in power for 30 years. And for the last 10 years, they've done nothing but take this country into a downward trajectory. So the brand is still strong. The ANC is in ICU, but is not dead yet.
But Rob, Jumana was just talking about how we are seeing some of the ANC's recent reforms bearing fruit. We haven't had load shedding, electricity outages for the past few weeks. Some of these fiscal reforms are seen as positive. Why shouldn't investors then be convinced?
ANC created load shedding. The ANC created the electricity supply problem in this country, and they're pretending they're fixing it now. The only reason that there hasn't been load shedding for the last 2 months prior to the election, unsurprisingly, is because the economy is not growing, so there's no demand on the electricity grid by the economy, and the private sector, private individuals, small and medium-sized enterprises, and large corporates have invested a huge amount in renewable energy to make sure that they have redundancy in case of load shedding. So the government has actually done nothing to help this country in load shedding. The ANC has actually created the problem, and they're pretending they're fixing it just before the election.
How do international investors, how should they perceive this, though? Because clearly there's an opportunity, right, to invest here in South Africa.
Is there? My worry is that the ANC is actually continuing to put this country into a zero growth environment, push socialism upon us, build unaffordable systems like the national health insurance, which we cannot afford, which Ramaphosa just signed into as an act. And I think the ANC is just going to continue to destroy what is left of this economy. We are 0% growth right now. They are useless and they are a destructive force, and we need to get rid of them. But unfortunately, in this election tomorrow, they will probably come in the low 40%. And then the question is, who do they form a coalition with? And that's the very worrying thing, because there's some not good options.
What do you think the best case scenario is, though, for the economy in particular?
The best case scenario is for the ANC to disappear off the face of the earth.
But we know that they're not going to do that. So,
you're correct.
what should, what is it investors should be looking out for?
Well, if the ANC is less than 40%, and they cannot form a government with the radical left EFF, the racist and radical left EFF, then they'll be forced to pull together some of the center-right parties into a coalition. And even though that probably will slow the trajectory downwards, it won't stop the trajectory. So having the ANC even in as a 33 or 42% partner in the next government is still a very bad thing.
How are you positioning ahead of the election, Rob?
So there's a concept called state proofing that has been introduced a number of years ago, but has caught the national attention, at least for the opposition. And state proofing is protecting yourself against the actions of the government. And it's quite depressing when you think about people and companies having to do that, to state proof yourself. It's have your own electricity, have your own water supply, try and have your own security, try and educate your children privately, try and have private medical, because the government cannot provide these services. They're incompetent.
What about, financially, though? Because we know there's a lot of capital sitting on the sidelines waiting for the outcome of this election. Financially, how are you positioning ahead of this?
So I would say that if a Martian had a look at the Earth and wanted to commit an investment to the world, what percentage would they commit to Africa and what percentage would they commit to South Africa? And my view is they'd commit nothing to South Africa. Why invest in an environment where you have a moronic, destructive, incompetent, kleptocratic organization like the ANC?
But you're still invested in the country.
I live here. I have money here that I can't take out. And I'm based here and I'm not leaving. So I'm going to try and make the best of it, but I'm going to protect myself by having the majority of my assets overseas. So if the ANC are in coalition with the EFF, there will be no foreign direct investment.
You believe it will start to decline?
It will disappear.
Okay.
No one in their right mind would invest in an ANC-EFF government in this country, because the EFF, in particular, want to attack property rights. There's a bill called, listen to the words of this, expropriation without compensation. Why don't they just say stealing? There's black economic empowerment. Also, theft. It doesn't work. Even Mbeki...
But they gave a lot of opportunities to a lot of black people in the country.
And they destroyed a lot of the economy too, because they put people into positions of power, cadre deployment, and put people into big stakes in companies who weren't capable of delivering the services that they promised.
So potentially...
It's really interesting. I never really saw or perceived the ANC from the perspective of a kleptocracy, as Rob Hersov really describes it here. Because, when you listen to him, many people actually have argued and criticized Rob Hersov here as being a representative of just the blindness of business, and that, Rob Hersov should probably learn to listen to the vote of the people. In a video also on Biz News, Rob Hersov actually claimed how, he stated how disappointed he was that, the majority of the electorate in South Africa seems to be favoring a leftist style, and also I know that, and also in a recent interview with Alec Hogg on Biz News, Rob Hersov has actually, expressed his, a regret that it seems that the electorate in South Africa are slowly shifting towards voting for a more leftist oriented, landscape, or leftist oriented perspective to development planning and all. And so it's really interesting that then he aligns and assigns the term kleptocracy to the ANC. So really, what does this really mean? How do we interpret this? I really found a really interesting report on The Conversation. This is really, it speaks about how it's asking the question of whether South Africa is a democracy or a kleptocracy. How do we interpret that? And how do we also interpret that in the light of now the new government of national unity that is being formed at the moment with the IFP, the DA, the ANC, and the Patriotic Alliance? How would that kleptocratic character of the ANC then morph now that it's forming a much more consolidation at the center of the political landscape, and also although it will be facing a lot of heavy opposition from the progressive left caucus that is being formed now with the likes of the UDM, the EFF, and the MK party. But anyway, let's understand what Rob Hersov means when he describes the ANC as a kleptocratic organization, so to speak. So in this article here on The Conversation, it's trying to understand how South Africa adds up on a kleptocratic scale globally. So it argues, this was during the Zondo Commission investigation of corruption in South Africa. It argues that South Africans have been held spellbound by the torrent of evidence of corruption emerging from two parallel commissions of inquiry into state capture and fitness to hold office of two senior officials of the National Prosecuting Authority. These strengthen perceptions that South Africa, under the former President Jacob Zuma, from May 2009 to March 2018, transformed from a democracy into a kleptocracy, which is definition is a country ruled by criminals or thieves. So that's what the kleptocracy means, and this is what Rob Hersov really, how he describes the ANC as a party of kleptocrats. Now, it says that South Africa scored only 43 out of 100 on the Transparency International Corruption Perception Index for 2018, Perception Index for 2018, down from 47 in 2009. So, in 2009, South Africa scored 47 in the corruption perceptions index by the Transparency International, but as at 2018 it scored 43. Okay, so it says here that the question is it indeed the case that South Africa has become a kleptocracy? Has it traveled far along the road to joining states such as Russia or Equatorial Guinea, notorious for being ruled by authoritarian leaders in a league with corrupt oligarchs at the expense of ordinary people? If this is so, is this condition reversible? So, in trying to understand kleptocracy, it argues that kleptocracy is a word that is derived from the Greek words for thieving and ruling. The word kleptocracy entered the modern social science lexicon through the work of Polish-British sociologist Stanislaw Andrzejewski in the 1960s. His book, The African Predicament, identified post-independence African regimes as kleptocratic. Basically, he presented kleptocracy as government by corrupt leaders who use their power to exploit the people and national resources of their country to extend their personal wealth and political powers. But the notion of kleptocracy didn't gain much leverage under the present decade. This reflects a widespread belief that corruption is gaining ground at an unprecedented rate around the world. So it says that the key to contemporary understandings is that kleptocracy now extends beyond the boundaries of the countries, and that kleptocratic plunder is becoming a danger to democracy globally. Whereas there was previously a strong tendency to see kleptocracy as primarily a pathology of countries in what used to be referred to as the third world, today it is recognized that the scourge has gone global. President Vladimir Putin is widely cited as leading the pack of kleptocrats, as according to this research now, and it argues that it is strongly followed by other emerging market economies such as Turkey and Malaysia, with African countries such as Equatorial Guinea and Nigeria continuing to feature strongly on the kleptocracy scale. Sub-Saharan Africa is the lowest scoring region that is the most corrupt in international index. Now, it says that the most distinctive development of the contemporary era is that advanced capitalist democracies are viewed as under threat from kleptocracy. For instance, there are accusations aplenty that the president of the US is being systematically used to enrich the families and companies of President Donald Trump. Also, it is widely recognized that despite the virtuous platitudes of the British government, London has become a major center for money laundering. So what has really changed? It says, simply put, globalization and neoliberalism have hugely increased the capacity of rulers, corporations and oligarchs and criminal networks to obscure their movement of money through the international financial system. The combination of neoliberalism and globalization has led to the development of a massive industry servicing kleptocrats. This spread outwards from London and New York to offshore jurisdictions and real estate hotspots, often arranged by Western financial services providers. Offshore finance has become critical. Untraceable shell companies are being used to shift money from one country to another. Once money has been cleaned in quotes, it is increasingly invested in luxury housing and valuable real estate. So this is a strategy of kleptocrats. So they invest a lot of the stolen money and reinvest it in real estate. Now it says that amidst this, the laundering of reputations become critical. This often requires hiring of politicians and lobbyists to rebrand kleptocrats as philanthropists and engaged global citizens. Now, let's go into the case of South Africa. It says that South African President Cyril Ramaphosa recently referred to the years of his predecessor, Zuma, as wasted. But typical of his style, this was an understatement. South Africa, under Zuma, advanced far down the road to becoming a kleptocracy. Corruption became increasingly organized. Politicians and parastatal managers being bought by external private interests. The Jacob Zuma Foundation appears to have served as a front for the outright theft and appropriation of public monies. Intermediaries such as KPMG and other auditing companies were used to hide the private appropriation of state resources from public gaze. Now, this is on the Conversation, really powerful article. It argues that the London-based Bell Pottinger public relations company this is now a public relations company named Bell Pottinger. It says it was used to explain away the scandals of Zuma's regime. While by its nature money laundering is obscure, there can be a little doubt that money has been squirreled away in offshore accounts. Revelations emerging from the two commissions of inquiry indicate that South Africa stands in a great peril of falling prey to kleptocracy. Under Ramaphosa, the government of the African National Congress has taken important steps to reverse the trend. And we know that in a video, I think I shared it on this channel, Ramaphosa argued how his regime actually fought against state capture and did a lot of good in the area of trying to fight back state capture. This article actually sort of corroborates that. So the article continues saying that Ramaphosa's efforts include the appointment of a highly respected advocate to become the country's chief prosecutor. I suspect this might be Zondo, but I'm not sure. It also argues that but much will depend on the political will of the ANC to rid its ranks of its in-house kleptocrats for this promise to bear fruit. Now, the battle to defeat kleptocracy, it says that tackling kleptocracy is enormously complex. Eliciting information from Myriad International, often reluctant, myriad of international sources takes time, money, and patience. Legal action is time-consuming and costly, and kleptocrats and their allies fight back strongly. But the good news is that South Africa has made a good start with the establishment of the commissions of inquiry. I think this is Zondo Commission, and President Thabo Mbeki speaks about the other commission. I don't remember the name now. But anyway, he speaks about how the bad news is that the ANC government's pursuit, the Nugent Commission. So I think the Zondo Commission and the Nugent Commission. So it speaks about how the bad news is that the ANC government's pursuit of the country's kleptocrats may drop off once it has won the national elections in May. It will be up to opposition parties, the media, and civil society to ensure that this doesn't happen. So this is from the perspective of the conversation on the article on the Conversation, and this article is actually the actual article is actually written by Roger Southall, really powerful article, and it speaks about how the ANC might escape its kleptocratic character now that it has sort of like assumed the majority, even though it's not the majority it had, but it's still sort of like in control of the government of national unity. But in the light of the fact that its new opposition wouldn't be, as Neil de Beer argues, that the DA has been a weak opposition. I think the opposition now in the likes of the Progressive Left Caucus, headed by the EFF's Julius Malema, the UDM's Bantu Holomisa, and then MK Party's Jacob Zuma, I think it would be a fierce opposition this time that will really take on the kleptocracy of the ANC head on. Hopefully, anyway. No one is really certain about how these things work. But I already saw an article saying that Julius Malema is already bringing up the Pala issue with Ramaphosa, and that that could be a really major stumbling block of Ramaphosa's presidency in this new government of national unity that has actually been set up recently, last Saturday, and that this might be a perspective to how the opposition in South Africa would take up the battle against the what Rob Hersov decrees as a kleptocratic ANC, and probably rescue South Africa from a dwindling, political economic climate. But I don't know. What do you guys think about this? This has been a lot of information, Rob Hersov, and the analysis. Share your thoughts. Share your thoughts. Let's see what you're thinking in the comments.